I think the best place to start episode 2 is gold. Everybody loves gold. These next clips are part of my gold discovery video. There's lots of books written on finding gold, but the one thing they all say is gold is where you find it, and the best places to look are where it has been found before. I have found gold, but I looked where others have found it before. I followed their stories, and this led me to this mine. Others have found this gold before and have left their mark to show it. At the end of this video, I'll touch on the shamans and their gold mine. This is Walter. His father found gold, and his father built the West Coast Trail. One thing about Walter's father's gold, Walter had the chunks of gold to prove his father found it. Chunks of ore hacked from a wall. I think there's one thing that excites people even more than gold. That's crystals and gemstones. This is the crystal mine. It's a crack on the edge of the volcano. It's filled with agates, geodes, and much more. This was mined in the past as well. I'm not going to get into who has found and staked this mine in the last 40 years because that would take an entire movie. I'll start the story in the early 1900s and we'll go back from there. There was a guy named Hoskins who found an old mine. The story was he found it during the war, but after the war he went back and a slide had come down and covered the mine, burying it completely. He found a foot-wide vein of quartz with paper-thin veins of gold running through it. As I said, Walter's father built the Dominion Life-Saving Trail. This was in 1907. This is where things get interesting. It's a story from Port Renfrew. Then in 1907, who should reappear but Foster, known as Old Foster. Before long, Foster was flashing gold. Not just nuggets, but solid chunks of it, hacked from a ledge high up in the San Juan. This is where I'm going to try and piece together a bunch of prospectors who found gold similar to Walter's from 1860 to 1907. When we found the source of Walter's gold, we knew that to find the big stuff we'd have to dig to bedrock. We found the unglaciated blue clay. In California, they gave it the name blue lead because it would always lead you to gold. We dug 17 feet down and never hit the bedrock before we had to abandon the hole. I don't mind telling you where my mine is because I hold mineral title to the whole thing. When we first found the gold in this watershed, it was pristine, 100% untouched by modern man. A beautiful valley about 1.5 kilometers long, guarded by 3 mountain peaks. With no snow in the winter, it truly was a piece of paradise. Before I start this part, I just want to point out that this is a very delicate subject for both the natives and the English, as this was a British colony. We'll start with the first prospector who opened a trading post just before 1860. Eddie Bamfield owned a mining claim on the island just outside the village at Sarita. Bamfield came out to the British colony in 1846 with the Navy. Soon he was looking for trading opportunities on the west coast. Bamfield was intent on encouraging colonization on the coast. October 1862, Bamfield died in mysterious circumstances. In March of 1864, another story reached Victoria to the effect that Bamfield died as a result of a stabbing. The accumulation of incidents had become too much, and the newly appointed governor of the colony of Vancouver Island was stirred into action. On arrival in Barkley Sound, Pike steamed up Trevor Channel past Bamfield Inlet to anchor in Nemookamus Bay. Here were assembled some 300 Hawaiian warriors ready to do battle. You can read the whole article, Joseph Denman and Justice on the West Coast of Vancouver Island. Another good book to read is called Journeys, Down the Alberni Canal to Barkley Sound by Jan Patterson. It talks about the logging that happened in this area and the sawmill in Port Alberni. I spent years metal detecting all these old homesteads and was actually accused of trespassing on this land, and the cops tried to charge me, but that's a long story. You'd have to read my book. This map before the treaty was done shows that these are homesteads on the edge of the reserve. You have to remember, this was a British colony, and this was during the Cariboo Gold Rush, when 35,000 prospectors flooded Victoria in search of gold. I've done my research, and all I'm going to say about the copper miners is dead men tell no tales. Back to the story. This time we'll go from 1859 to 1907. We'll start with Old Man Foster's gold from around 1860. An American named Foster made his dynamic debut. He first appeared in San Juan, Port Renfrew, with 2 companions. Somewhere they made a rich strike. Foster and his friends weren't saying anything. Taking the coastal boat to Victoria, they apparently went their separate ways and were more or less forgotten. Then in 1907, who should reappear but Foster, flashing not just nuggets but chunks of the prized ore hacked from a wall. Prospectors all seem to be searching for one thing, the deep blue lead, a channel of gold left behind by a prehistoric river. The Christie lead was from 1876, a lead that was a run of gold that was 30 meters wide and continuous for almost 1.5 kilometers. I do like this one. Unlike the rest of Canada where I live, it's warm and green. This valley, supposedly an oasis in the Northland, when the surrounding mountains and valleys were deep in subarctic snows, the evil valley reputedly remained warm and green, its demons constantly on the prowl. Everyone knows the story of Slumach's lost mine. This newspaper article from the 1900s says ankle deep in nuggets. January 16th, 1891. Peter Slumach stood on the gallows, staring at the crowd gathered below, sentenced to hang for the murder of Louis B. Slumach uttered a curse on his gold in Indian. When I die, the mine dies. Slumach told my father that only one time did he ever take gold out of the pit. They gave him a handful of bullets they molded from gold, which they found in the third canyon. Slumach spent the night in the canyon and slept on a bench-shaped rock on the west side of the river. He awoke at 5 a.m. and he could scarcely see the sun coming over the 3 mountain peaks for the east wall of the canyon. Let's just call it a coincidence how my gold, these tiny flakes, are found on top of a blue lead, a blue clay, in a 1.5 kilometer long valley, the top of the 3rd ravine, guarded by 3 mountain peaks. Many have searched for this incredible mine, but only 2 are believed to have found it. One such searcher was John Jackson, who arrived in New Westminster in the spring of 1903. Listened to all the tales of Slumach's mine, then in July employed 2 Indians with canoes to take him and his supplies to the head of the lake. Jackson left some clues, a letter and a map. He said, "What I found is too great to be lost to the world." I climbed to the top of a sharp ridge and looked down into the little canyon or valley, about 1.5 miles or 2 miles long. It appeared to have no outlet for the little creek that flowed at the bottom. Afterwards I found the creek entered a blank and is lost. The formation for the most part had been slate and granite, but there I found a kind of a schist and slate formation. Now comes the interesting part. I found colors at once right on the surface, and such colors they were. The bedrock was yellow with gold. Some of the nuggets were as big as walnuts, and there were many chunks carrying quartz. Before I show Jackson's map, I just want to point something out. In 1903, Walter's father worked for the cable company in Bamfield. He found chunks of gold with quartz attached to them and pieces of silver hacked from a mine wall. Saying he found Slumach's Lost Creek mine and I found his mine would be crazy. This is Jackson's map. Let's just say it's coincidence how he keeps drawing the 3 mountain peaks and the same dome that can be seen at the mouth of the Bamfield Harbor right next to the cable station. Telegraph line for this cable went along the trail. When I was being investigated for trespassing, I sent a video and a letter to the archaeology branch. I got this back. There's a basic principle from philosophy of logic that the most simple explanation is probably the correct explanation. If you hear the sound of hoofbeats, your first thoughts in this country ought to be of horses, not zebras. In your area, first think Aboriginal people and hand loggers, not Spanish or Inca. I'm not going to get into this investigation. Freedom of Information, I got the entire RCMP report. Bottom line, Crown did not approve charges because he said I had no grasp on reality and found no archaeological proof. This investigation was 908 pages long. As you'll see in a later episode, this got out of control. They tried to falsely accuse me of Section 182. I finally got the archaeological report from 1984. There is absolutely no indication this is a First Nations burial cave. Yet, I'm still getting accused of raiding Indian burial caves, accused of stealing artifacts from Indian burial caves. Little Stevie actually thinks I went to jail for this. A few days ago, he actually called me the investigator. I guess he found out that I filed formal charges against the BC government for allowing the knowing desecration of international heritage sites. The RCMP know what the laws are towards defamation, yet they still call me crazy and still tell people I'm crazy. I'm getting off topic. Let's get back to Slumatch's Lost Creek mine. On a modern map, we should be able to figure this out. Occam's razor says he went to Vancouver, and the easiest place to look would be Pitt Lake. I would say the place to look is where the gold is, and where the prospector found his big chunks. I'm making this video to show the Spanish mine. This all started when I found a cave, and then an Indian legend about the cave. Then I took a shaman to the cave.
In order to see the image of the miniature mountain, the gold color, and the real mountain is so quite a distance from here.
Show there's real history in this area. I don't have permission to plagiarize The Daughters of Copperwind, but I'm going to use it and ask for forgiveness later. The first part talks about the Spanish. She says, "They teach us in school that Cook found this place. He wasn't the first. There was lots of Spanish here first, a long time before the English. About 3 boatloads of martyrs. Conquistadors. Conquistadors with metal on their bodies and metal hats on their heads. They came out of the fog." I'm going to cut this short now. I'll put the rest of the video later on in an episode. Let's get on to something else. I think for the rest of this video, we're going to have a little fun. As I said, little Stevie, the local archaeology guy for the logging company, has given me a new nickname. He's calling me the investigator. That's fine. I'm kind of used to it. It's getting to the point now where you can't hide history. And the desecration that happened in the last few months on my mining claims was the last straw. We call these salal berries. 1,000 years ago, the Vikings called them the grapes of Vinland. During a small global warming, when Eric the Red lived in Greenland, I believe his ships sailed through the Northwest Passage, which was ice-free. They sailed to the island up on the left-hand corner. The coast of this island had trees as big as houses, giant salmon, and it never snowed during the winter. Look familiar? As you'll see in my later episodes, thinking that the Europeans actually sailed across the oceans is absolutely insane. What's even more insane is thinking I found an old English cave that Robert Louis Stevenson wrote about. The following story is a fantasy about a cave I call Jimmy's Cave on Skull Island. And thereupon we all entered the cave. It was a large, airy place overhung with fern. The floor was sand. Before a big fire lay the captain. A human skeleton lay with a few shreds of clothing on the ground. What sort of way is that for bones to lie? It ain't in nature. The man lay perfectly straight, his feet pointing in one direction, his hands raised above his head like a diver's, pointing directly in the opposite. "Here's the compass. Just take a bearing, will you, along the line of them bones." The body pointed straight in the direction of the island, and the compass read duly, east, southeast, and by east. "And here is the pointer. Right up there is our line for the Pole Star and the Jolly Dollars. But, by thunder, if it don't make me cold inside to think of." This is one of his jokes, and no mistake. Him and these 6 was alone here. He killed 'em, every man. And this one he hauled here and laid down by compass. Shiver me timbers, they're long bones. There ain't a thing left here. No, by gum, it don't. Not natural, nor not nice. Says you, great guns. 6 they were, and 6 are we. The bones is what they are now. This is definitely a chilling story. Is it fantasy? Or is there really a boy in a box with his skull crushed open, laid out to look like a Jolly Roger, the skull and crossbones? I'll dedicate this to Stinky Jim. He was a hermit that lived in Kelp Bay. After he passed away, I helped spread his ashes out on the islands.